Feldwebel Karl Becker pressed his eye against the cracked periscope, its glass fractured like a spider's web across frozen water. Through the distorted lens, he watched a silhouette emerge from the smoke and rubble that had once been Germany's fourth-largest city. For 3 years, Becker had memorized every profile of American armor that rolled off Detroit's assembly lines. The squat M4 Sherman with its inadequate 75mm gun. The light M5 Stuart, barely worth the ammunition to destroy it. Even the rare up-armored jumbo variant that, despite its thick hide, couldn't penetrate a Tiger's frontal plate beyond 500 meters. But this machine, pushing through the devastated square, looked fundamentally wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hull sat lower, the angles sharper and more aggressive than any Sherman he'd studied. The turret seemed disproportionately large, almost swollen. And that gun, dear God, that gun was longer and heavier than anything he'd ever seen mounted on an American chassis. It protruded like an accusing finger, pointing directly at his position behind the rubble of the Garyon Hotel. Becker whispered 2 words his crew had never heard pass his lips in 32 months of combat. Das ist unmöglich. That's impossible. 18 seconds later, Becker and his crew would become part of a historical footnote. They were about to discover that the United States had finally fielded a weapon capable of killing a Tiger I from any range, at any angle, under any circumstances. The M26 Pershing, mounting the fearsome 90mm gun that would rewrite every assumption German tankers had carried into battle since 1942. This is the story of how that moment came to exist, a tale of industrial might, technological innovation, and the psychological collapse of what it once seemed an invincible force. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. When the first Tiger I rolled into combat near Leningrad in summer 1942, Soviet observers initially believed they were witnessing a new type of self-propelled gun. At 57 tons, with frontal armor exceeding 100mm on the hull and 120mm on the turret face, it resembled a mobile fortress more than a fighting vehicle. The heart of the Tiger's dominance was the 8.8cm KWK-36 gun, originally an anti-aircraft weapon designed to knock bombers from 30,000 feet. Mounted in a tank turret, it became something far more terrifying. At 2,000 meters, well over a mile, the Tiger could penetrate any Allied tank then in service. The Soviet T-34 might as well have been constructed from cardboard at that distance. The American M4 Sherman found itself catastrophically outmatched. Its 75mm gun could only penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor under ideal conditions. Range under 100 meters, perfect perpendicular angle, specialized tungsten core ammunition, and considerable luck. The crew would be firing at a target that could destroy them from 20 times that distance. German tankers exploited this disparity ruthlessly. Oberfeldwebel Johannes Richter of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion described the advantage. We positioned on the ridge at dawn. Through the Zeiss optics, we could identify individual rivets on Soviet tanks at 1,800 meters. We destroyed 7 T-34s before they even located our position. By the time their return fire began, we had withdrawn. They never touched us. June 13, 1944, Villers-Bocage, France. SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann commanded Tiger 007 when a British armored column rolled into view, unaware, strung out, vulnerable. In 15 minutes of methodical devastation, he destroyed 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 other vehicles. The British armored column ceased to exist as a fighting force. Wittmann's Prue engaged each target with calm precision, knowing no return fire could harm them. German propaganda seized upon Willers's bocage. Wittmann became a national hero. The Tiger transformed from weapons system to symbol, proof of engineering superiority, evidence that quality would always triumph over quantity. For Allied tankers, Willers's bocage reinforced a darker lesson. Tiger fever began spreading through American and British armored units. Any German tank silhouette became a tiger in frightened minds. After-action reports counted far more Tiger encounters than the Wehrmacht actually fielded. If you thought you saw a Tiger, your probability of survival dropped to near zero. The Panther, introduced at Kursk in 1943, extended Germany's advantage. At 45 tons, it mounted a high-velocity 75mm gun with exceptional penetration. Its sloped armor provided protection equivalent to much thicker vertical plates. At normal combat ranges, a Panther could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor with casual ease. Panthers were faster than Tigers, more maneuverable, and crucially, cheaper to produce. Together, Tigers and Panthers established a new battlefield calculus. German crews operated with psychological certainty of superiority. They painted kill rings on gun barrels like aces marked victories. They positioned at maximum range, confident they could engage and destroy Allied armor before facing meaningful return fire. The technical advantages compounded. German Zeiss optics provided clarity and magnification Allied equipment couldn't match. Rangefinders allowed accurate distance calculation beyond 2,000 meters. Individual Tigers regularly destroyed 10, 15, even 20 Allied tanks before mechanical failure or overwhelming numbers ended their runs. American tank crews developed grim humor. The Sherman earned nicknames, Ronson, after a lighter advertised as lighting first time every time. British troops called it the Tommy Cooker because once penetrated, Shermans burned with horrific speed. But Allied commanders understood harsh arithmetic. Tigers and Panthers dominated individual engagements, but the Wehrmacht couldn't replace losses. Each Tiger destroyed represented months of manufacturing. American industry could absorb catastrophic losses and continue producing Shermans. But German confidence bred a dangerous assumption, that this superiority was permanent, that American doctrine would never fundamentally change, that Detroit would continue producing endless Shermans because Americans lacked engineering sophistication to build anything better. In darkened factories across Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, 50,000 workers were proving that assumption catastrophically wrong.
Lieutenant Harold Jensen watched 3 of his company's Shermans burn in a field 400 meters ahead. The German gun, a Panther most likely, though it could have been a Tiger, had engaged from a tree line at the field's far edge. 3 shots, 3 kills. The return fire from his remaining tanks threw up dirt around the German position, but accomplished nothing. Jensen's radio crackled. "Able 3 to Able 1, we have no penetration. Request permission to flank left through the hedgerow." "Negative, Able 3, artillery is inbound. Hold position." It was the same conversation happening across Normandy that summer, the same calculation made 1,000 times. The M4 Sherman, America's primary tank since 1942, had been designed to fight a different war. In 1941, when the Sherman specifications were finalized, the most dangerous German tank was the Panzer IV, equipped with a short-barreled 75mm gun. Against that threat, the Sherman's armor and firepower were adequate. Its 75mm M3 gun could handle early Panzer models. Its reliability, ease of maintenance, and suitability for mass production fit perfectly with American strategic doctrine. But by 1943, the battlefield had evolved in directions the Sherman's designers never anticipated. The numbers were unforgiving. At 500 meters, a fairly typical combat engagement distance, the Sherman's 75mm gun firing standard armor-piercing ammunition could not reliably penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor, period. With specialized tungsten core rounds and a perfect perpendicular hit, penetration might occur at 100 meters. Might. The Panther presented similar problems. Its sloped frontal armor, 80 millimeters thick but angled at 55 degrees, provided effective protection equivalent to 140 millimeters of vertical steel. The Sherman's gun could only defeat it with flank shots or by targeting the thinner side and rear armor. Meanwhile, both the Tiger's 88mm and Panther's 75mm could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. German gunners knew this. They positioned accordingly, engaging Allied tanks from distances where return fire posed no threat. A Tiger commander could sit hull down on a ridge, destroy approaching Shermans one by one, and withdraw before artillery or air support could respond. The Sherman's armor protection was never designed for this punishment. The frontal hull armor measured 51 millimeters, barely 2 inches, sloped at 56 degrees. When an 88mm armor-piercing shell struck at high velocity, it typically punched through both sides of the tank, killing the crew and often igniting ammunition stored in the hull. The Sherman's tendency to burn wasn't merely psychological. Its ammunition storage system placed shells in sponsons beside the driver and assistant driver. A penetrating hit in that area almost guaranteed catastrophic fire. Crew survival rates for penetrated Shermans were significantly lower than for German tanks, where ammunition was stored in more protected locations. American tankers developed dark rituals around this vulnerability. Many crews refused to load more than minimal ammunition, reducing fire risk at the cost of combat effectiveness. Some packed sponsons with sandbags or extra track sections, adding weight and reducing mobility for marginal protection. Others welded scrap steel to their hulls in improvised armor that did more to impede movement than stop German shells. Still, the Sherman possessed genuine strengths. It was mechanically reliable in ways German tanks were not. The Ford GAA V8 engine required simpler maintenance and fewer specialized parts. A Sherman could operate for weeks with minimal service, a critical advantage in sustained campaigns. American industry could produce Shermans in staggering quantities. Production exceeded 49,000 units during the war. Germany, by contrast, struggled to manufacture a few hundred Tigers annually. For Allied commanders, this created a brutal calculus. Yes, 5 Shermans might die destroying 1 Tiger, but those 5 Shermans could be replaced within days. The Tiger could not. Yet for the men climbing into those Shermans each morning, statistics provided cold comfort. Corporal Thomas Brennan, a gunner in the 3rd Armored Division, later recalled, "We knew the odds. Everyone knew. You'd see a Tiger or Panther and your stomach would drop because you understood what was about to happen. The only question was whether you'd get close enough to put a round in his flank before he killed you. Usually you didn't." The British attempted to address the firepower gap with the Sherman Firefly, a variant modified to mount the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun. Fireflies could kill Panthers and Tigers frontally at reasonable ranges, making them priority targets for German gunners. In Italy and Normandy, American doctrine adapted to the Sherman's limitations. Tanks operated in larger groups, attempting to swarm German armor from multiple directions. Infantry-tank coordination improved. Artillery support became standard for any engagement involving German heavy tanks. These tactics reduced losses, but couldn't eliminate the fundamental mismatch. American tankers closed to point-blank range because their guns were ineffective at distance. They accepted casualties as the price of engaging an enemy who outgunned them. The psychological toll compounded the physical danger. Crews climbed into Shermans knowing they were overmatched. They advanced toward tree lines where Tigers might be concealed. They crossed open fields where Panthers could engage from a mile away. By December 1944, when German forces launched their Ardennes offensive, the Sherman's inadequacies had become undeniable. As Tigers and Panthers led the attack through frozen forests, American tank crews faced the same terrifying reality. Their primary weapon couldn't fight the enemy's best armor on equal terms. Reports from the front emphasized this repeatedly. Commanders requested heavier guns, thicker armor, anything that would give their crews a fighting chance. But American tanks didn't need a few hundred up-gunned Shermans. They needed a new tank entirely. 4,000 miles away, in factories that worked 24 hours a day under wartime security protocols, that tank was being built.
Inside the Fisher Body Division's sprawling complex, welders worked under lights that never dimmed. The night shift at the Grand Blanc tank arsenal operated with the same intensity as the day crew, moving between assembly stations where massive cast turrets hung from overhead cranes. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Signs warned workers that discussing production details outside the facility constituted treason. Most of the men and women on these lines believed they were building an improved Sherman variant. The compartmentalized nature of wartime manufacturing ensured that no single worker saw the complete picture. Turret crews didn't interact with hull assembly teams. Engine installation happened in separate buildings. Only senior engineers and military liaisons understood what was actually taking shape. Project T-26 had begun in September 1942, within weeks of the first intelligence reports about Tiger tanks reaching Washington. Army ordnance recognized immediately that American armor development had fallen dangerously behind. The M4 Sherman, adequate in 1941, was obsolete against the weapons Germany was fielding. The solution required more than incremental improvements. It demanded a fundamental rethinking of American tank design. 14 major contractors joined the program. Over 300 subcontractors contributed specialized components. Across 22 states, 50,000 workers became part of an effort whose scope rivaled the Manhattan Project for secrecy and urgency. The Fisher Body Division, which had produced Shermans by the thousands, received orders to retool entirely. Production lines designed for one tank had to be redesigned for another. Casting facilities learned to pour single-piece turrets weighing over 6 tons, components requiring precision and metallurgical expertise that pushed American manufacturing capabilities. The centerpiece of the T-26 program was firepower. Engineers adapted the 90mm M3 gun, a weapon originally designed for anti-aircraft use. German pilots already feared the 90mm AA batteries that could knock bombers from the sky at extreme altitudes. Mounted in a tank turret, that same gun would finally give American crews a weapon capable of defeating German heavy armor. The ballistics were impressive. The 90mm fired a 24-pound armor-piercing round at muzzle velocities exceeding 2,800 feet per second. With the standard M8 APC round, it could penetrate 119 millimeters of armor at 500 yards, enough to punch through a Tiger I's frontal plate. With the newer T-30 E16 HVAP round, featuring a tungsten carbide core, penetration increased to 221 millimeters at the same range. Even the King Tiger, Germany's heaviest production tank with frontal armor exceeding 180 millimeters, was vulnerable. But the T-26 represented more than just a bigger gun mounted on a larger chassis. American engineers incorporated features that German designers had overlooked or dismissed. The gun stabilizer, while primitive by later standards, allowed reasonably accurate fire while the tank was moving, something German tanks could not achieve. Panthers and Tigers had to stop to aim effectively. In fluid combat situations, that disadvantage could be fatal. The power traverse system rotated the massive turret 360 degrees in 15 seconds, faster than the manual cranking systems in most German tanks. Quick reaction time meant the difference between firing first or dying first in close engagements. Ammunition storage used wet racks, shells surrounded by water glycol jackets that would absorb heat and prevent catastrophic explosions if the tank was penetrated. German tanks used dry storage, where a single penetrating hit
often cooked off the entire ammunition supply, creating fireballs that killed crews instantly. Inside the T-26, crew ergonomics reflected lessons learned from 3 years of combat feedback. Padded surfaces reduced injury during movement over rough terrain. Electric lighting improved visibility and reduced eye strain. Interior layout gave each crewman more space to operate effectively. These seemed like minor details, but they increased crew efficiency and survivability significantly.
The power plant was the Ford GAF V8, producing 500 horsepower. While not dramatically more powerful than German Maybach engines on paper, its reliability proved superior in field conditions. The transmission system, more sophisticated than anything in German service, provided smooth shifting and dependable operation even under sustained stress. Maintaining secrecy required extraordinary measures. Workers on the assembly line received only the information necessary for their specific tasks. Components manufactured in different facilities meant no single location could reveal the complete design. When the first T-26E3 tanks, soon to be designated M26 Pershing, were completed, they were labeled as heavy maintenance equipment on shipping documents. On January 15, 1945, under cover of darkness, the first 20 Pershings were loaded onto transport ships at the New York port of embarkation. Shipping manifests listed them as spare parts and maintenance vehicles. Tarps concealed their distinctive silhouettes. Even the sailors transporting them across the Atlantic had no idea what cargo lay in their holds. The voyage took 11 days through waters still patrolled by German U-boats. To further disguise the shipment, Pershings were positioned in the holds behind rows of standard Shermans. If torpedoed, the secret would sink with the ship. Meanwhile, selected crews trained in isolation at Fort Knox, Kentucky. These men were sworn to secrecy under threat of court-martial. They studied German armor recognition, practiced gunnery with the 90mm gun, and drilled maintenance procedures on tanks they were forbidden to photograph or discuss. They learned cover stories. If questioned by other units, they were replacements for standard Sherman companies, nothing more. By late January 1945, the Pershings arrived at Antwerp, unloaded under the same secrecy that had accompanied their departure from New York. Special trains transported them to maintenance areas near Düren, Germany, where the 3rd Armored Division was preparing for the final push into the Reich. Major General Maurice Rose, the division commander, personally briefed battalion leaders. His orders were explicit. The Pershings would remain concealed among Sherman companies. They would be deployed only when German heavy armor appeared. Their existence would remain secret until the moment of engagement. On February 25, 1945, 4 Pershings were assigned to combat units, 1 per task force. Their olive drab paint and standard markings made them blend with other American armor at a distance. The longer gun and lower profile might attract attention from trained observers, but in the chaos of combat, few would notice until too late. German intelligence never detected the program. Despite extensive networks of spies, signal intercepts, and aerial reconnaissance, the Wehrmacht had no indication that an entirely new American heavy tank existed. This represented one of the great intelligence failures of the war, a failure rooted in assumptions that would prove catastrophic. German commanders believed American doctrine was fixed: quantity over quality, mass production over innovation. They assumed Detroit's industrial capacity was devoted entirely to churning out thousands of adequate Shermans, not developing superior designs. That assumption was about to cost them everything they'd built since 1942. For American crews training in secret at Fort Knox, the waiting ended in late February. They loaded their tanks on the transporters, moved to forward positions, and prepared for combat. For the Germans holding Cologne, confident in their Panthers and remaining Tigers, revelation would come at 3:47 p.m., March 6, 1945, delivered at the muzzle of a 90mm gun they didn't know existed. The age of German armored invincibility was measured in seconds now, and Karl Becker, peering through his cracked periscope at a tank he couldn't identify, had 18 of those seconds remaining. The Panthers' commander, Feldwebel Wilhelm Hartmann,
had positioned his tank with tactical precision behind the rubble of what remained of the Geryon Hotel. Cathedral Square offered clear sight lines across 400 meters of open ground, a killing field where any American armor would be exposed and vulnerable. Hartmann had fought from North Africa to Kursk, from Italy to France. He knew the geometry of armored warfare intimately. At 3:20 p.m., movement caught his attention. Through his commander's cupola optics, he identified what appeared to be a Sherman advancing cautiously from the western approach. The profile seemed familiar, though something about the gun barrel's length registered as unusual. At 300 meters, well within his Panther's lethal envelope, he gave the fire command. The 75mm KWK-42 roared, its high-velocity round streaking across the square in a fraction of a second. Hartmann watched through his optics, expecting the familiar sight of a Sherman's turret erupting in flame. Instead, sparks flew from the American tank's frontal armor as the round ricocheted away at a sharp angle. Hartmann had perhaps 3 seconds to process the impossible. His round had struck true, perpendicular impact at point-blank range by Panther standards. That shot should have punched through any Sherman's armor like paper. Yet the American tank continued advancing, seemingly undamaged. Then came the return fire. Inside the M26 Pershing designated Eagle 7, Staff Sergeant Robert Early gave the fire command with the calm precision of a man who had trained for exactly this moment. Corporal Clarence Smoyer, the gunner, had already centered the Panther's turret mantlet in his sight picture. The 90mm M3 gun stabilizer kept the reticle steady despite the Pershing's forward movement. Smoyer squeezed the trigger. The 90mm M3 gun discharged with a concussion that rattled windows in buildings 200 meters away. The 24-pound armor-piercing round crossed the square in less time than a human heartbeat, traveling at 2,800 feet per second. It struck the Panther's turret face at the gun mantlet, one of the few areas where the sloped armor couldn't provide maximum protection. The tungsten core penetrator punched through 100 millimeters of steel as though it were tin. Inside the Panther's turret, the round's kinetic energy transformed into catastrophic effects. Metal fragments sprayed through the crew compartment at supersonic velocity. The impact detonated stored ammunition. Hartmann's Panther erupted in a pillar of flame, visible across Cologne. The 5-man crew died instantly, their bodies consumed in the ammunition cook-off that followed penetration. Secondary explosions blew the turret hatch open, black smoke pouring into the sky above Cathedral Square. Signal Corps photographer Jim Bates, positioned near the cathedral's main entrance with his 16mm camera, captured the entire engagement. His footage would show the Panther's initial shot ricocheting harmlessly from Eagle 7's armor, followed immediately by the Pershing's devastating return fire. Within 72 hours, that film would circulate through Allied headquarters across Europe. It was the first documented instance of an M26 Pershing destroying a German heavy tank in combat. More significantly, it was captured on film. Irrefutable proof that American armor could now engage Panthers and Tigers on equal or superior terms. Accounts vary regarding what happened in the following minutes. Some after-action reports mention a Tiger I attempting to maneuver into a firing position from a side street. Others suggest it was a second Panther. Combat is chaotic, and eyewitness testimony from different participants often conflicts. What remains consistent across all accounts, Eagle 7 destroyed a second German heavy tank within 5 minutes of killing Hartmann's Panther. Another single shot, another frontal penetration, another catastrophic kill. For American tankers who had spent 3 years watching Shermans burn at distances where they couldn't effectively return fire, the Cologne engagement represented a fundamental shift. The technical imbalance that had defined armored warfare since 1942 was ending. For the Germans, it was the beginning of a nightmare they couldn't yet comprehend.
Urgent reports began arriving within hours of the Cologne engagement. Radio intercepts suggested American tanks were destroying Panthers from ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Field commanders reported frontal penetrations of heavy armor that should have been impossible with the Sherman's 75mm gun. Obersteinrich Muller, senior intelligence officer for armored operations, reviewed the accumulated reports with growing concern. Something fundamental had changed on the battlefield, but the pattern made no sense within existing assumptions. Every engagement report describes the same phenomenon, Mueller told his staff during the morning briefing on March 8th. American tanks with unusually long gun barrels achieving frontal kills on Panthers at combat ranges. Some crews report being penetrated at distances where the Sherman's 75mm should be ineffective. The obvious conclusion that the Americans had fielded an entirely new tank seemed impossible. German intelligence had extensive networks monitoring Allied industrial production. Signals intercepts tracked communications between American factories and military depots. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed shipping convoys. None of this intelligence suggested a new heavy tank program. Could this be a modified Sherman? Suggested Major Franz Weber, the battalion liaison, perhaps mounting a larger gun? The British Firefly uses a 17-pounder on a Sherman chassis. We know that profile. These reports describe something different: lower hull, larger turret, significantly longer gun barrel. The confusion stemmed from a fundamental intelligence failure rooted in preconception. German analysts had assumed American doctrine was fixed, mass production of adequate equipment, rather than development of superior designs. This assumption had been reinforced by 3 years of facing endless Sherman variants, none representing a qualitative leap. The possibility that American industry could secretly develop, produce, and deploy an entirely new heavy tank while maintaining Sherman production seemed to contradict everything German intelligence believed about Allied capabilities. Consequently, most field reports were interpreted through the lens of existing assumptions. The mysterious American tanks became long-roar Shermans, long-gun Shermans in German communications. Intelligence officers theorized that the Americans had somehow mounted a larger weapon on the standard M4 chassis, similar to the British Firefly concept. This misidentification had tactical consequences. Wehrmacht training manuals still instructed crews that American tanks could not penetrate German heavy armor frontally at combat ranges. Tank recognition charts showed Shermans, Stuarts, and British variants, but no M26 Pershing. Tank schools provided no guidance on how to fight this new threat because officially it didn't exist. Panther and Tiger commanders continued engaging with the old assumptions and died when those assumptions proved false. Oberleutnant Kurt Steiner commanded a Panther in the 9th Panzer Division near Remagen. On March 12th, his tank encountered what appeared to be a Sherman column at 1,200 meters. Standard doctrine called for engaging immediately at that range, confident that return fire posed no threat. Steiner's gunner destroyed one Sherman with the first shot. The second American tank in line fired back, and Steiner's Panther erupted in flames before the crew could react. The round had penetrated the frontal armor at a range where the Sherman's 75mm should have been ineffective. Steiner survived, pulled from the burning tank by his driver. During interrogation 2 days later, he insisted repeatedly that his Panther had been destroyed by a Sherman firing from over a kilometer away. Intelligence officers noted his testimony, but attributed it to combat stress and misidentification. The pattern repeated across the Western Front throughout March. German tank crews reported impossible kills by American armor. After-action reports described frontal penetrations at extreme range. Survivors spoke of tanks that looked like Shermans, but fought like nothing they'd encountered before. Yet German headquarters, constrained by its own assumptions,
continued interpreting these reports as exaggeration or misidentification. The institutional inability to accept that American industry had produced a tank equal to German heavy armor created a cascading intelligence failure. By mid-March, however, the evidence had become impossible to dismiss. Physical examination of destroyed German tanks revealed penetrations consistent with a weapon far more powerful than the Sherman's 75mm. Ballistic analysis suggested a gun in the 88 to 90mm class. Reports from multiple fronts described the same tank profile: lower hull, larger turret, distinctively longer gun barrel.
But the advisory came too late to change tactical doctrine or crew training. More critically, it couldn't address the psychological impact of the revelation. For 3 years, German tank crews had operated with absolute confidence in their technical superiority. That psychological advantage, the certainty that no Allied tank could threaten them frontally at combat ranges, had been as important as the armor itself. It allowed undermanned units to hold positions against superior numbers. It enabled aggressive tactics. It sustained morale through retreat and defeat. The realization that American tanks could now kill Panthers and Tigers frontally shattered that psychological foundation. Interrogation reports from captured German tankers throughout late March and April reveal a consistent pattern. Crews admitted that uncertainty about what they faced had become as dangerous as the American tanks themselves. The inability to identify whether an approaching tank was a harmless Sherman or a lethal Pershing created hesitation, and in armored combat, hesitation was fatal. "We no longer knew what we were fighting," admitted Feldwebel Otto Klein during interrogation on April 3, 1945. His Panther had been abandoned near Paderborn with minor mechanical issues that would normally have been repaired in the field. "Every American tank might be the one that could kill us. We stopped taking chances." The intelligence failure extended beyond tactical misidentification. It revealed a strategic blind spot. German leadership had fundamentally underestimated American industrial capacity for innovation at scale. The assumption that the United States could produce in vast quantities but not in superior quality had been proven catastrophically wrong. American factories had accomplished what German intelligence deemed impossible, developing and mass-producing a heavy tank while maintaining Sherman production, all under wartime security that prevented German detection. For the Wehrmacht, already retreating on every front, this revelation destroyed one of the last psychological advantages sustaining continued resistance. Hauptmann Ernst Bauer, a mechanical engineer drafted into technical intelligence analysis, stood beside the burned-out hulk of an M26 Pershing that had been knocked out near Cassel. The tank had struck a mine, immobilizing it before being destroyed by German anti-tank guns. While the damage was extensive, enough remained for detailed examination. What Bauer and his team discovered during their analysis would confirm the worst suspicions of German armored commanders. The 90mm M3 gun dominated the examination. Bauer's team measured the barrel length, calculated the chamber volume, and analyzed recovered ammunition. The ballistics were sobering. With standard M82 armor-piercing ammunition, the gun could penetrate 119mm of armor at 500 meters, sufficient to defeat a Tiger I's frontal plate. With the newer T30E16 HVAP round, featuring a tungsten core HVAP round, penetration increased to 221mm. This exceeds the penetration of our 88mm KWK-36. At combat ranges, the American gun is superior to the weapon mounted on our Tiger tanks, Bauer noted in his report. Even more concerning was the newer ammunition. The tungsten core HVAP rounds could defeat the frontal armor of a King Tiger, something no Allied tank gun had previously accomplished. The psychological implications were obvious. If deployed in significant numbers, the M26 represented a threat to Germany's heaviest armor. The turret construction revealed manufacturing capabilities that impressed and unsettled the German engineers.
Unlike the welded turrets on Panthers and Tigers, the Pershing's turret was a single massive casting. This required industrial precision and metallurgical expertise that German factories, hampered by bombing and resource shortages, could no longer match for components of this size. The casting construction provided several advantages. It eliminated welded seams that could become weak points under repeated stress. The rounded shape improved ballistic protection by encouraging rounds to ricochet rather than penetrate. The manufacturing process, while requiring sophisticated facilities, actually increased production speed once the casting infrastructure was established. Bauer's examination of the armor protection showed that American designers had learned from German innovations. The glacis plate, the frontal hull armor, was sloped at aggressive angles that increased effective thickness without adding weight. This mirrored the Panthers' design philosophy, but executed with superior metallurgy.
The measured armor thickness revealed protection comparable to German heavy tanks, 102 mm on the frontal hull at a 46-degree slope, providing effective protection equivalent to over 140 mm of vertical armor. The turret face measured 114 mm with additional curvature for deflection. While not as heavily armored as a Tiger II, the Pershing's protection was more than adequate against most German tank guns at typical combat ranges. The power plant surprised the examining engineers. The Ford GAF V8 produced 500 horsepower, not dramatically higher than German Maybach engines, but its reliability and maintainability were superior. The engine was designed for mass production, with interchangeable parts and simple maintenance procedures. German engines, by contrast, often required specialized components and skilled mechanics. More impressive was the transmission system. The Torquematic automatic transmission provided smooth power delivery and ease of operation that German tanks couldn't match. Panther and Tiger crews struggled with complex manual transmissions that required significant physical effort and mechanical expertise. The Pershing's transmission allowed less experienced drivers to operate the tank effectively with minimal training. Bauer's team identified the gun stabilizer as a critical tactical advantage. While primitive compared to post-war systems, it allowed the Pershing to fire with reasonable accuracy while moving, something German tanks absolutely could not do. Panthers and Tigers had to stop to aim effectively. In fluid combat or meeting engagements, this difference of seconds could determine who fired first. The power traverse system rotated the turret 360 degrees in 15 seconds using hydraulic power. Many German tanks, including late-war Panthers, still relied on manual traverse that required crew members to physically crank the turret around. Quick traverse meant faster reaction times, particularly critical in close combat or when engaging multiple targets. Inside the Pershing, the design philosophy diverged sharply from German approaches. Where German tanks prioritized armor thickness and firepower at the expense of crew comfort, the Pershing's interior showed attention to ergonomics and crew survival. The wet stowage ammunition racks particularly impressed German examiners. Shells were surrounded by water glycol jackets that would absorb heat from a penetrating hit, drastically reducing the chance of ammunition cooking off. German tanks used dry racks where ammunition sat unprotected. A penetrating hit almost always triggered catastrophic explosions that killed the entire crew. Bauer calculated that this single feature could increase crew survival rates by 40% or more. For American tankers, this meant that even if their Pershing was knocked out, they had a reasonable chance of escaping alive. For German crews, in Panthers and Tigers, a penetrating hit was usually fatal. Even minor details revealed different design priorities. The Pershing featured an infantry telephone mounted on the rear hull, allowing foot soldiers to communicate directly with the tank crew. German tanks lacked this entirely, often leaving infantry and armor unable to coordinate effectively in combat. Interior lighting was electric rather than relying on ambient light through vision ports. Padded surfaces reduced injury during cross-country movement. Storage arrangements kept ammunition and equipment organized rather than piled haphazardly. These seemed like small considerations, but they added up to a tank that crew members could operate effectively for extended periods without excessive fatigue. The optical equipment matched German quality, something that had previously been a decisive German advantage. The Pershing's periscopes and gun sights used high-quality glass that provided clarity and magnification equal to Zeiss equipment. This erased one of the last technical edges German crews had relied upon. Bauer's final report, submitted to Wehrmacht headquarters on March 28, concluded with a sobering assessment. The American M26 represents a comprehensive heavy tank design that equals or exceeds our Tiger I in most combat parameters. It combines firepower superior to our 88mm gun, armor protection adequate against most German weapons at combat ranges, and mechanical reliability that surpasses our current designs. Most significantly, it incorporates crew survivability features we have neglected in our pursuit of maximum armor protection. The report's final paragraph was even more damning. The M26 is not an improvised response or modified Sherman. It represents a deliberate, well-engineered heavy tank developed from original specifications. American industrial capacity has achieved what we believed impossible: the mass production of a tank that matches German quality while maintaining their quantitative advantage in Sherman production. For German tank commanders reading Bauer's technical analysis, the implications were clear. The Americans hadn't just built a tank that could kill Panthers and Tigers. They'd built a better tank, one that protected its crew, incorporated tactical innovations, and could be manufactured in numbers Germany could never match. The technical autopsy confirmed what battlefield reports had already suggested. The age of German armored superiority was over.
Oberfeldwebel Martin Krause sat in his Tiger I behind a stone wall outside Paderborn, listening to his crew debate abandoning the tank over a thrown track pin, normally an hour's repair. 2 weeks earlier, he would have ordered the fix immediately. But 2 weeks earlier, he hadn't known American tanks could kill his Tiger frontally. They abandoned the tank. Throughout April 1945, this pattern repeated across the Western Front. German crews who once fought with fanatical determination were abandoning vehicles for reasons previously unthinkable: empty fuel tanks, thrown tracks, minor engine trouble. American forces discovered dozens of Panthers and Tigers left roadside with minimal damage, half-full fuel tanks, operational engines, simply deserted by crews who no longer believed survival possible. The psychological collapse manifested everywhere. Defensive positions that should have held for days were abandoned within hours once Pershing rumors circulated. Units that had aggressively hunted Allied armor now adopted purely reactive postures, waiting in concealment rather than seeking engagement. Lieutenant Andreas Fischer, captured near Dessau on April 11th, explained during interrogation, "For 3 years we knew we had the advantage. A Tiger or Panther could always win against a Sherman if we fought properly. That confidence sustained us through everything: the retreats, the losses, the knowledge we were losing the war. Then the Pershing appeared, and suddenly we didn't know what we faced. Every American tank might be the one that could kill us. That uncertainty destroyed our will to fight." The fear was compounded by identification difficulties. From 1,000 meters, a Pershing silhouette resembled the Sherman closely enough that positive identification proved difficult. Every engagement carried uncertainty: another M4 easily destroyed, or the new tank that could penetrate frontal armor at range. German crews began hesitating before engaging, trying to identify targets more carefully. In tank warfare, hesitation was fatal. By the time a crew confirmed they faced a Sherman, an accompanying Pershing might have already fired. The psychological damage spread beyond crews with direct experience. Units that had never encountered a Pershing operated under the assumption they might at any moment. Rumors amplified the threat far beyond actual deployment numbers. This represented a fundamental shift in German armored doctrine. Throughout the war, even in retreat, heavy tank units had operated aggressively, seeking advantageous positions and ambushing Allied columns. By April 1945,
That aggressive mindset had evaporated. The self-fulfilling nature of the fear made it devastating. Because crews believed they couldn't defeat Pershings, they avoided engagement. This avoidance meant they never learned the M26, while superior to the Sherman, had vulnerabilities. The long 88mm on the King Tiger could defeat a Pershing frontally at range. A well-positioned Panther still had tactical advantages in specific situations. But German crews never discovered these possibilities because fear prevented them from fighting. The psychological defeat preceded battlefield defeat. The Wehrmacht's armored strength dissolved not primarily through combat losses, but through psychological collapse. The myth of invincibility that had sustained German tank crews through 3 years of war had been shattered in a handful of engagements. For American intelligence officers analyzing prisoner interrogations, the pattern was clear. The Pershing's impact extended far beyond its modest deployment numbers. The 20 tanks that saw combat in March and April 1945 had inflicted psychological damage across the entire German armored force. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it.
By April 1945, the industrial mathematics of the tank war had become undeniable. Germany produced approximately 100 armored vehicles monthly. American production exceeded 2,000 tanks per month, with over 2,200 M26 Pershings completed by October 1945. More heavy tanks than Germany's entire wartime Tiger production. The numbers told a story of inevitable defeat. Germany manufactured 1,347 Tiger I tanks and 492 King Tigers across the war's entire span. America produced more Pershings in less than a year while maintaining Sherman output at levels Germany could never approach. The Fisher Body Division's Grand Blanc arsenal alone produced 1,739 Pershings, representing industrial capacity that dwarfed Germany's entire armored vehicle industry. For German commanders, the implications were catastrophic. Even if their tanks were superior, and by April 1945 that was no longer true, the quantitative disparity made victory impossible. The United States could absorb losses that would cripple the Wehrmacht and continue producing replacements indefinitely. Lieutenant Karl Becker, captured commanding a Panther near the Ruhr pocket, articulated this realization during interrogation. We believed our technical advantage in armor might let us hold defensive positions, make the advance costly enough that the Americans would negotiate. Then we learned they had built a tank better than ours and could produce it in thousands. At that point, there was no rational reason to continue fighting. The industrial advantage extended beyond raw production. American maintenance systems could recover knocked-out tanks and return them to combat within days. German recovery capabilities had collapsed under Allied bombing and fuel shortages. American divisions received steady streams of replacement tanks, while German units fought with whatever remained operational, often down to single-digit strength. The mathematical inevitability was clear. German victories no longer mattered strategically. A Tiger that destroyed 5 Shermans merely delayed the inevitable. Those Shermans would be replaced overnight. The Tiger, once lost, would not be. With Pershings entering the battlefield, even tactical victories became impossible. The equation that had sustained German resistance, technical superiority compensating for numerical inferiority, had collapsed. The final irony was ideological. Nazi doctrine built German strategy on assumptions of racial and technical superiority. The belief that Aryan engineering would triumph over democratic societies has sustained resistance even as the strategic situation deteriorated. The Pershing destroyed that ideological foundation as completely as its 90mm gun destroyed Panthers. Here was proof that a democratic, ethnically diverse society had outproduced and out-engineered the supposedly superior Germanic race. When SS tank crews abandoned King Tigers at rumors of Pershing presence, they weren't just retreating from superior firepower. They were fleeing from the collapse of everything they'd been told to believe about themselves, their nation, and their cause. Only 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender, and approximately 20 saw combat. Statistically, their battlefield contribution was modest, yet the Pershing's impact far exceeded its deployment numbers. It broke the myth of German invincibility at the precise moment when that myth was all that sustained continued resistance.
The footage from Cologne of Eagle 7 destroying a Panther became one of the war's most iconic images, proof that American armor had finally caught up. In German headquarters, urgent memos demanding information about the mysterious M4 Sherman revealed an intelligence collapse. In interrogation centers, captured crews admitted they had lost faith once they realized Americans had heavy tanks. The Pershing demonstrated principles that shaped American military doctrine. Industrial capacity and adaptability matter more than individual weapon superiority, and democratic systems can outproduce and out-innovate authoritarian regimes when fully mobilized. The greatest irony remains ideological. In the final months, a democratic society with diverse workers and vast factories fielded a tank equal to Germany's best. The cognitive dissonance for SS crews wasn't merely tactical, it was existential. The Pershing's victory cannot be measured in tanks destroyed. Its victory was measured in fear instilled, morale shattered, and certainty erased. It showed that industrial democracy could outproduce totalitarianism and that psychological collapse can be as decisive as battlefield statistics. The hunters had become the hunted, and the age of German armored supremacy ended with the thunder of a 90mm gun, a gun German crews never knew existed until it was too late. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.